Trey Gingles.
Yes.
Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. You're an interesting guy. You spoke with our ag leadership class. You're an alumni of that program. What were you, class 11, 12, 13?
Bobby knows. I don't remember. We were the best class that ever was.
The best class that ever was? Okay.
Every other alumni that would come and talk to us would be like, y'all's class is good, but ours is better.
Of course.
And I think it was class 14.
14.
So what are y'all?
Y'all, South Africa.
Yeah.
That was two classes ago. We're 16, so it's class 14.
Yeah.
So you're 14. Y'all went to South Africa on y'all's trip. We're going to Japan and Thailand.
Yep.
You spoke to our class the other day about the timber industry, but you also shared some insights about Japan, so thank you for that. You are a forester by trade. Tell me about how that is, what you do.
I work for a company called Westrock. We have one big paper mill here in Louisiana at Hodge, and my job is to help the regional fiber supply manager, my boss, procure wood for the mill. We source wood for our mill two ways. We have gate wood, or open market, and then we have a stumpage program. The Gatewood or open market guys, they're dealing with all of the small timber companies around North Louisiana and South Arkansas.
Okay.
So most timber companies have 2 or 3 foresters or timber buyers. They have anywhere from 2 to 4, 6 logging crews. Some of them more, but they go directly to the landowner. They buy their timber, and then they have a delivered price that they deliver to our mill. And our Gatewood foresters work with their foresters to come up with that delivered price, monitor the flow of tons coming into the mill, monitor their quality, help them with maintaining their best management practices and all that stuff. So our Gatewood foresters are an interface between us and those timber companies that deliver to us.
Okay.
My job within that is to be a miniature timber company. So I have myself, a guy named Kevin Smith, and another forester named Luke Coleman, and our job is to buy timber directly from landowners, and then we have 6 to 8 contract logging crews. It's our full-time logging force that cut exclusively for us and deliver that product to our mill.
Got you.
So I'm a miniature timber company within Westrock's Forest Resources Group at Hodge.
So what Westrock is essentially a mill?
Yes, we make craft paper. So if you had a piece of cardboard, if you cut it and looked at it, the side, there's a top piece, a bottom piece, and a wavy piece in the middle. We make the roll of paper that goes to a corrugation plant that makes that piece of cardboard.
Okay, cool.
So it's called craft. It looks like a grocery bag, but it's a little bit thicker.
Okay, neat. Do you ever, what cardboard boxes? Any cardboard box?
If you've eaten a pizza, we made the box.
Okay, there you go. That's kind of cool.
So
I've talked to other people at paper mills that say, well, if you had a Bud Light out of a Bud Light box that came from our plant.
And like our competition, Graphic Packaging, that they make what's called, I'm not sure what they call it, but we call it wet strength. So it's a beer box. Mm-hmm. It's made out of paper, but it's got wax on it so it can stand up to
the strength,
cold beer sweating.
Yeah. Interesting. So y'all making pizza boxes,
right?
Amongst other things.
Yeah, and so our mill just produces a big roll of paper.
Gotcha.
And then it goes to another manufacturing facility and gets further manufactured.
Yeah.
So
it's like I guess maybe cotton. You could maybe draw the parallel with cotton, coming out of a gin as a raw product, then going to become thread.
Right.
Then going to become
exactly. So we're basically making the thread that would go to a place that makes bed sheets or
Gotcha.
whatever.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So
very interesting. So you are also a career Marine guy.
Yes.
Marine guy.
Just a Marine, yeah.
Where did that come in? Did that come in before forestry?
Yeah, okay, so when I graduated from high school, I enlisted. We lived in New Orleans, and I left home at 18, did 4 years on active duty, then decided I was going to get off of active duty and go to college. So I came back, ended up back at Louisiana Tech, or back in North Louisiana, because that's my family's from around Coshada. Mm-hmm. My dad had moved to New Orleans for a job when I was young, and so I grew up basically in both places. I would stay down there during school, and as soon as school was out, I would spend the summers at my grandparents in Coshada. Mm-hmm. And so when my dad retired, while I was gone that first 4 years, they moved back to North Louisiana. So I just came back here to go to school. And I started out in environmental science. And then I changed to ag business. I actually went to Northwestern for a little while and then came back to tech and started and finished in forestry.
What was it about forestry that kind of sucked you in?
The biggest thing, so my first college class, okay, in a military school environment, it's very strict. You know, you're there on time. You know, the instructor's there, he's ready. My first college class, I got there early enough to turn the lights on in the class. This is literally the first college class I'd ever been to in my life. It was an 8 o'clock class. I got there at like 7:40, turned the lights on in the class, and thought, okay, so I'm here early. That's what you're supposed to do, because if you're on time, you're late. I sat there, and I think about 10 minutes after 8, people started showing up. Well, the first girl that walked in was literally in pajama pants, a T-shirt, and she had like fuzzy bunny slippers on and a baseball hat. And I thought, holy, what world am I in? And then so then people started showing up, because I think, 15 minutes? If the professor's 15 minutes late, you can leave, true, and you don't get counted for. So people started stacking into the class between 8:10 and say 8:14. Well, at 8:15, the professor came in, and he was very much the stereotypical college professor. And the first thing he said was, in a very mild voice, "My goal is to make you gentle and scholarly." And I was sitting there thinking, like, what planet am I on?
That's not the goal in marine in classes in marine.
So, I stayed in that for a little while, and then I changed to ag business, and then most of the first part of ag business was poultry, and we went to a poultry plant in Natchitoches. And when I walked out of there, I said, there's no way I'm going to get a college degree and work in a place like this. Nothing against chicken. It's great. I'm not working. I'm not wearing a hairnet, rubber boots, and a lab coat to work. I'm not doing it. I talked to some people and found out about forestry, and found out that Tech had a forestry program. So I came over and talked to the dean of the college, and came back to Tech and started forestry school and loved it. Mm-hmm. And I liked it because we were outside a lot. It was a small group of people on campus. Nobody really knew what we did. But it just seemed like fun work. So that's kind of how I drifted. I think most people, it's rare, I think, when somebody starts college and knows exactly what they want to do and does exactly what they want to do through the 4 years. I've never talked to a person that started school to be whatever and stayed there and did it and
that was
change.
Me. I was not that guy.
So I wasn't either. But so I stayed in the Marine Corps Reserve the whole time that I was in college. And then when I graduated, I went back, got my commission, and became an officer in the Marine Corps. But I always would come home and like mark timber for somebody or help somebody cruise. So I stayed tied to the people that I went to forestry school with. So when I finally got off of active duty the last time, I was able to come back and basically go right to work. So
you were able to keep your skills up.
Right.
What are the skills? I'm the ignorant row crop kid. What are the skills of a forester? What kind of stuff are you doing? So when you say these, like cruising timber?
You're doing a lot of navigating, like driving to some weird place out in the middle of nowhere, finding the property that you're going to be evaluating the timber on or whatever you're doing. And then there's a lot of measurements or inventory type skills. So you have to land nav or navigate, and then being able to do forest inventories. And just that's coming up with a volume of byproduct of what you're either going to help somebody sell or you're going to buy from them. Mm-hmm. And just measuring and counting trees.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, of course.
But I think it's the same. I think they do essentially the same thing in row crops, where they have a way to measure a smaller area than a full acre.
Sample.
And then they take in samples, statistical samples, and figuring out, okay, if there's this much in 2 square feet, how much is in 500 acres. So, and forestry is the same
kind of thing.
Yeah,
so you'll sample a little.
Yeah, exactly. Small area.
Got you. So what was it? I mean, how did those kind of, obviously you liked being outside. You liked having to use your skills to navigate, into the middle of some woods.
Right.
What did you bring from the Marines into that other than knowing your way with the GPS?
The biggest thing to me was people. The Marine Corps is made up of, I served with people from every state in the U.S., and then there were some people, like there was a kid in the unit that I was in right before I got out to go to college who his family had basically snuck out of Czechoslovakia, and this kid lived in a refugee camp in Italy for 2 years, and then somehow made his way to the U.S. and was able to enlist in the Marine Corps. So that's the kind of my point is you're exposed to people from all walks of life. I mean, there were and here's an example, another example. A lot of the Marines from New York City, they were older, 21, 22 years old, never had a driver's license. A country kid's going to start driving when he's 10 because he's helping on a farm. He may not get his license till he's 15 or 16, but he's been driving for a long time. Yeah. Well, there were Marines that I was in that they had always they got on the subway or walked. They didn't need a driver's license.
Totally different walk of life.
Right. One, there's nowhere to park your car. Two, it may get stolen, and you just don't need it. You can get around as good on a train or walking. So they just, that's the kind of stuff. And then, so just the differences in people and having to work with all those people, to me, that's probably the biggest intangible skill that being in the military or the Marine Corps helped with the timber business. And then the reason that I love the timber business is everybody that I deal with on a day-to-day basis was in college with me, and so you just that group of people now were scattered out over the state, and those are the people that I contact when we run into a challenge or something good's happening or you just need news about something. All the people that I'm talking to are people that I knew from college. So it just makes it easier when you're talking to somebody you know.
Yeah, and but there's also times though where you're dealing with a lot of contract. You're dealing with truck drivers. You're dealing with mills where there might be somebody you might be butting heads.
Right.
But you still got to work with them.
Exactly.
And that's something you probably took from the Marines. I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. And and this is something we were talking about earlier, but like at work, I was talking to a guy that worked with me the other day, and I said, you got to look at this as like being in a lifeboat. You were on a ship, it sank, you got forced into this boat because it's either sink or swim, and now you're in this boat with people you may not like or care about, but you all have a common goal, and until you get to another boat or the island, you got to work together. So the common interest of survival. And business is survival. Business is warfare. It's just slowed down. People are making a living. If you don't make a living, you will die. And so we just take a break at night, where when you're fighting, it's 24/7.
Yeah.
And that's a condensed life. But business is that. It's the struggle of man. It's the same. Cavemen did the same thing. They had to get up and go find something at a club to eat. Well, now we have to get up to go do something to pay the guy that's clubbing something to eat. You see what I'm saying? But it's the same thing.
Yeah. Just a few years down the road.
Yeah, there's not that much difference between us and them.
Yeah.
So,
but it's a valuable skill,
people.
though.
It's just people, and sometimes you have to go along to get along, and knowing, the older I get, the more I realize the power of positive leadership. It's easy to be negative. Sometimes it's hard to get people to focus on, hey, let's just solve the problem. And people get caught up in, and I'm guilty of this too, people get caught up in their ego or their pride or whatever. It's like, hey, what do we got to do to fix the problem? The older I get, the more I realize that the more positive you stay, most generally, that tends to work better than not.
Now, is that another skill from the Marines?
I think it. Yeah, I think so. To me, I just call it knowing people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in the timber industry, and this is an industry that I will own 100% that I am quite ignorant about.
Right.
I don't know if I made that clear earlier whenever I was asking what it is to cruise timber, but
Right.
it's something I don't know anything about, but it's also the state's number one ag industry, ag commodity.
Right. That's what, not to stop you, but that's one thing about that I was talking to Dr. Swallow about yesterday. Every class struggles to find a forester to get in the class. Mm-hmm. And my class was no different. I was literally the only forester that was in there. And there was another guy who worked for a land company, but he really was not. He was more on the business side of it.
Yeah, that's all we've got in ours.
So I've never, that's a mystery to me.
Boggles your mind, yeah. Well, it's just crazy that it's it's the biggest, by a pretty good margin, industry, ag commodity in the state. I think it's what, $12-13 billion.
Yeah, I think if you take all the other agricultural stuff in Louisiana and put it together, it's not even half of what the timber business is.
Yeah, it's heads and shoulders.
Right.
But it's kind of one of those. It's also 1,000% different. In my head. Yeah. There is common ground between the two, between timberland and also growing a corn crop.
Right.
But what is it like, I guess, working in an industry that when you got a 30-year cycle or 35 or 40-year cycle on the crop?
Okay, so it is different in that, like your crop rotation age for us is, I think when I was in school, they were using 32 or 35 years. But I think the biggest thing is you kind of recognize that what I'm doing today, somebody else is going to reap the rewards of later. Now, when I was right out of college, I didn't really think that way. Mm-hmm. But the older I get, the more I start realizing, because now I've been around long enough now to where I can go past a place that I clear cut and help replant, and now I'm going back and thinning that. That's when you start realizing, like, okay, as I get towards the end of my career, there'll be clear cuts in places I've done timber harvest or purchase timber that the next time that happens, I'm not going to be here. Mm-hmm. But I think it's good for us as an industry because it makes you realize. I think it makes you more aware of doing the right thing.
The people behind you are dependent on you.
Correct. Yeah.
That's something that I think that's one of those common threads. I mean, yes, you're still watching your crop grow and you're managing that crop.
Right.
With thinnings and with, prescribed burns and all those different types of management practices.
Right.
The same way a farmer will, put out pesticides if he needs it or, whatever
Exactly.
it may be. But there's also that common thread of conservation and taking care and doing what's right, like you just said.
Exactly.
There's that. I mean, that's something that any farmer I've ever spoken with, it's on the front of their mind because maybe not the forester coming behind them, but maybe their children that are coming behind them. And it's probably the same with some landowners too.
Oh yeah.
It's their investment for the future.
Oh yeah, so absolutely.
How big has that become? I know it's something that's very front of mind for a lot of people that are dealing maybe in the produce or in livestock type industry where the customer is the one eating the food. It's kind of different, but is it still something that's real for the timber industry as far as conservation and sustainability and things like that?
Absolutely. So like at just the personal level, and I'll use my company, West Rock, as an example. We don't own an acre of land. So when we're dealing with landowners or they're consulting foresters and just the general public, because we don't own any land, we, in my opinion, are really kind of, and not forced, probably is not the best word, but we're encouraged because we don't own any land to do the right thing, because I'm going to have to go back. If I buy your first thinning today and it takes us 12 months to cut it, well then 5 to 7 years from when we finish cutting it, you're going to want to thin it again. Mm-hmm. Well, I've now been in this position long enough to where I'm now going back and buying tracts from landowners a second time that I cut their timber 5 years ago.
So it's in your best interest to do it well and to take care of the place.
And then just like with a farmer, and I know we talked about this earlier, but like if you owned a car factory, let's say you made a car, you wouldn't intentionally destroy that car factory. Well, why would I not be an environmentally minded person, because the dirt or the earth is what is growing our crop. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do, at the personal level, you're just from that, you're encouraged to do the right thing. And then we're audited on just about everything, but we are, our paper products are certified, FSC, SFI, American Tree Farmer, but we have to do certain things and prove that we do them to maintain those certifications. Mm-hmm. So, we're incentivized by our corporate customers who want a certified paper product to come from certified wood. So there's just the forester that's out there looking after, a harvest on somebody's land, mm-hmm. that you're going to sit next to the guy you bought his timber from at church to, hey, when Pizza Hut buys our boxes, they want to know that that box is made by certified forest products.
Gotcha.
Meaning that the certification is our way of proving that we've done things in an environmentally sound way.
Yeah.
So
that's cool. And that's something that I feel like could easily be missed just because of the products. I mean, you mentioned it. It's like the thread. There's so many different levels of production that has to happen with forest products. I mean, it goes back to the very beginning. The landowner is taking care of that land, the forester that's on it. I think it's cool because it's harder to see, maybe, I guess.
And here's another thing that's really starting to occur. So the land base in this area was, and this is kind of a Trey's history lesson, but you had a generation that came back from Europe or the Pacific after World War II, and they either inherited land or they bought land, okay? Then they either farmed it or they had a job and they had that land for recreational purposes, mm-hmm. okay? Well, those people are starting to die. Well, their kids came up in a lower to middle class family. They went to college. They got a job in marketing, or they're a computer guy. Well, now they don't live in Louisiana. They live in Colorado or California or Texas or Kansas. And so now, instead of dealing with their dad, the old crusty veteran, now I'm having to call his 3 kids who are working in
white-collar jobs, maybe? Or
yeah, he's a computer guy with Apple in Silicon Valley, and he knows nothing about forestry, and you start talking about cutting trees down, and people don't always react positive to that. Mm-hmm. We need to be environmentally conscious and know what we're talking about to be able to explain, hey, to keep the timber on your property healthy, you need to do certain practices. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, doing those things you're going to make money off of.
Yeah.
And we're going to do it in an environmentally sound way. So the paradigm is shifting from the people that bought that land to now people that have inherited it, and they don't live in Louisiana anymore. So they're not around this business, this industry all the time. They're scattered out all over the country, and they see things differently. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, as that shift continues, we're going to have to go back to the old landowner assistance model, where you have a bunch of foresters that are maintaining relationships directly with those landowners and explaining to them why what they're doing or what we're doing is in their best interest.
Yeah,
and it's in the environment's best interest. Almost as a proxy
to them taking care of their
land.
Correct.
Yeah. Exactly, because the landowner base is changing. Mm-hmm. The people that grew up in the Depression knew, or they understood the importance of growing trees. They are being replaced by people who the value of the tree has gone from monetary to recreational, or just being able to look at it and they have more of a sentimental value of that tree, and they don't want you to cut it down.
One of the things that's interesting to me, and I didn't know this, I didn't learn this until the Ag Leadership Program, was how much actually like managing some timberland, or managing a forest is actually good for the wildlife within that forest.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I think would also kind of plays into that. Like, hey, it's in the best interest of the white-tailed deer or of whatever wildlife may be in there.
Right.
And that's it's just neat. So can you explain some of that and how that works?
So foresters, and this goes back to the college thing or why I picked forestry. Forestry is, unlike a lot of other sciences, I can talk about something and then I can go get you in my truck and take you somewhere and show you the proof of it. Okay? So foresters in logging, when we're cutting trees, we're mimicking the same thing that Mother Nature does. So let's say you took a bulldozer and just cleared off 40 acres of land somewhere and just didn't do anything. Well, the first thing that would pop up would be little grass and what we call weeds and stuff. But then you would start seeing trees coming up. Well, you're either going to have too much or too little. Most places out in the woods, you'd probably have too much. In other words, there'd be other big trees around there that would see that blank land in, and you'd have thousands of tree stems per acre because they're coming. It takes a long time for that to self-thin, where forestry practices is you're going to plant, let's say, 600 trees to the acre or 800 trees to the acre, whatever you decide you're going to plant. Well, when those trees start growing, we talked about this a little bit in the woods yesterday, those trees are growing, they're reacting to sunlight, okay? If it's a tree that's growing out in the middle of a pasture, leaves grow trees, so it's going to put as many leaves, it's going to make as much surface area to get as much sunlight as it can. So if it's getting sun from all sides, it's going to grow limbs and leaves everywhere. It's going to look like a big bush, which is why you see like a big oak tree out in a pasture, it looks like a bush. Bigger, but that's what it looks like because it's getting sun from all directions. A tree that's grown tightly in a stand of other trees, it's racing those other trees to get up to the sun, so it's got a long, tall, straight bole or stem with a tuft of leaves on the top of it. Well, at some point, they start stagnating because there's too many mouths eating out of the same plate. So when that happens, to keep your growth, if you plotted the growth of trees on a graph, it would go up and then it would stagnate because now there's too many mouths eating out of the same plate. So you go in and remove some of those trees. They shade each other out. They're competing also for not just light, but for water, nutrients out of the soil. So you go in there and cut, let's just say for general purposes, a third of those trees off of that, out of an area, and the rest of the trees that are left now have less competition, and they start growing again. So the race is on again. Well, then they get to a point where the canopy closes, there's less sunlight getting to the floor, and they start slowing down again. So every time they slow down, a forester thins it. You're getting the same result that you would get over 100 or 200 years done naturally. You're getting there quicker. So we're mimicking the same thing. People talk about clear cutting is not natural. Well, Mount St. Helens, when it erupted in whatever year it erupted, it clear cut thousands, millions of acres. A hurricane, a tornado, a forest fire, that's clear cut. It's the same thing.
You mentioned forest fires, and let's not get too political, but
right.
I've been to California with our ag leadership trip this past summer. You've been, you've seen it, and as a forester, you understand it's a different climate, a different regulatory climate over there.
Absolutely, and it's not just California; it's the Western U.S.
All the Western U.S. is that way.
Yeah, and it goes back to, so in the Southeast, I think it's like 80% of the land is owned by private landowners. Well, when you get out west, when we settled the West, the government owned the land, and then they either gave it as an incentive to get people to settle the West, or people just went out there and basically claimed it. But most of the land in the Western U.S. is owned by the federal government. That's when the states are square, because they just squared it off and said, hey, we're going to call that Colorado or whatever. So the politics of it is different because there's less people tied directly to that land. Here, people own it. They're tied to it. Out there, it's just the public's land. And the U.S. Forest Service and the BLM and those agencies are not always allowed, because of political reasons, to do what most would consider sound forest practices, like prescribed burning. I had a professor at Tech talk about Smokey the Bear and how that was the worst thing that ever happened to the western forest, because everybody wants to prevent forest fires. Well, those kids that learned from Smokey the Bear that forest fires are bad are now voting 40-year-olds that live in Silicon Valley, and they don't want to look out and see something burning. But what they don't realize is that fire is just like rain. It's a weather phenomenon, and forests burn, and that's sometimes, if it's done the right way, is a healthy thing.
So how would it be healthy? I mean, I feel like I understand you're pretty much taking all the fuel away, right?
Yeah, so if you never burn and you keep a fire out of an area, the trees are dropping leaves on an annual cycle, things are dying, so that the fuel load starts building up. Well, out west, there's not as many roads, there's not as much water, and then there's a lot more fuel on the ground because they don't let them do prescribed burns to take that fuel load, reduce that fuel load. So when it starts burning, it's burning excessively hot, and that's kind of an oxymoronic thing to say. Like, you have a cool fire and a hot fire, but there is a difference. And so if you've done controlled burns, you've reduced the fuel load. So if you do have a wildfire, a fire that wasn't set in such a way that it can be contained, then you have these massive fires that destroy everything.
Just uncontrollable
But
fires.
even those fires, like, I've been through Raton Pass in southeast New Mexico, Raton Pass, Raton Pass, I think it's Raton, and some other places out there where you can tell, man, this place burnt up, but things are growing again.
Yeah,
and so it's a natural cycle. But if you can kind of keep it where it has less destructive power, you're reducing the amount of time it takes to get back to what people enjoy. Most people enjoy a mature forest stand with very little understory.
Understory being
little bushes and
brush.
thickets.
Okay.
Because it's easy to walk around, you can see a long way.
You can see through it, yeah.
But that's not always the healthiest thing, But a forest fire here, you're reducing the fuel load, you're reducing some of the unwanted species, and then after a fire, you go out after a fire, and literally a week or 2 weeks after a fire, you have all these little plants coming up. Well, that's the stuff deer like to eat. And then not to mention you've put nitrogen back in the soil, so you're making the soil healthier and more productive. So that's one of the benefits of fire.
Yeah. It's just interesting because it's one of those things that on the surface, you think, a fire running through a forest, like Smokey the Bear says, is wrong.
Right.
It's terrible. But it's actually it's a good management practice if done.
Yeah, and the reason that, and the state there's an ongoing effort that's been going on for a while to return a lot of the state to its natural longleaf pine plantations. Well, that longleaf pine has to have fire to keep it healthy. It comes when it starts sprouting. It's in what's called the grass stage, and when it's in the grass stage, it has to be burnt to make it start growing like a tree. They have serotinous cones on them that won't open up unless there's heat from a fire to make those cones open up to drop the seeds out. And the reason that we had those those stands of longleaf pine is because the Indians burnt the woods to help them hunt.
Wow. So it's an ancient thing.
It's natural. Fire in the woods is just like rain or sunshine. But Smokey the Bear, fire in woods is bad, influenced a generation, and then they started voting, and then they started protesting, and they influenced the Forest Service to not do what it should do. And so now you have a fire in California that burns up a bunch of people's houses, they don't realize they probably contributed to that.
It comes back to an education thing that you were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
We talked about this yesterday. Insurance rates are ridiculous. And you gave a great anecdote, a story about a trucker, and that's just one of the challenges, but it all comes back to education. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. So the two biggest challenges that we're facing in the forest products industry right now are rural roads in the state of Louisiana and log truck insurance rates. So each and every forest products mill pays what's called a severance tax. When we sever a tree, depending on the product that tree is going to become, there's a per ton tax that we have to pay. This year in the state of Louisiana for pine pulpwood, it's 46 cents a ton. So 46 cents a ton, just for ease of talking about it, let's say it's $1. So that dollar goes to the state. The state says 75 cents of that is going to go back to the parish the tree was growing in and was cut in. Mm-hmm. And we have to keep up with each track we're cutting by parish so we know who's going to get the money. Okay? And we get audited on that too.
So that's on the buyer?
That's on the end, the market. Okay. So when that tree gets delivered to us, we have to know where it came from so we can take the taxes and send the severance tax for that tree to the state.
Got you. Okay.
The state says, okay, we got $1 for this ton. We're going to take 25 cents of that, and we're going to fund statewide forestry programs like the Forest Productivity Program, where they cost share site prep and replanting for the landowners. They fund things like the Hill Research Farm that y'all were at. Mm-hmm. Some of it probably goes back to the state's forestry schools, but then 75 cents of that tax dollars goes back to that parish, and it's for road maintenance in that parish. Okay. Mm-hmm. So over the last couple of years, those parishes, they needed money for roads. So when you have a log truck going up and out of road, people see that and say, well, the log truck is tearing our road up. And the forest products industry is not perfect. We've done some stuff where we didn't go back and fix a road or whatever, but for the most part, we do a good job of taking care of stuff. Mm-hmm. But we also pay that tax. And I have, we get information from the state on how much severance tax is paid in each parish. So as these parishes were needing money, they were looking at the two biggest industries, oil and gas in some parishes, and the timber industry, and coming to us and saying, hey, you're messing up our roads. We need to have a permit system, and which really is just a fancy word for another tax, mm-hmm. To use our roads. Well, what we figured out is we had to go back and educate our elected officials.
On the parish level, right?
On a parish police jury level, they didn't even realize that they were getting money from the state, from the timber business, earmarked for road maintenance. Mm-hmm. And so that's been a challenge.
Yeah.
We would find out that, hey, we're going to start having to pay this, or we're going to have to do this to be able to log in a certain parish after the fact. And we were able, as an industry, to go back to those parish government agencies and say, hang on a second, do you realize that if you keep doing what you're doing, it's going to force us to do business somewhere else? Let us work with you to come up with a solution that's a good solution for everybody, because, oh, by the way, last year, our industry sent you $800,000 to do road maintenance in your parish.
Yeah.
And if we don't do anything here because you've made it so restrictive, you can kiss that $800,000 goodbye.
Yeah.
And normally, when people hear that and they realize, with a little bit of education, hey, we're about to give up $300,000 that went to roads in a parish, or whatever the number is, they start to listen.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the people complaining don't have to pay any taxes. If you live in a rural setting, you have homestead exemption, you're not paying a direct tax that's going to go to help with the roads. Mm-hmm. But you have a business that's doing business in your parish that doesn't live in your parish, it's not taken away from it, it's actually putting money into your parish, you're probably going to listen to them.
Yeah.
And so we learned pretty quickly that we had to look at it from a standpoint of educating people and saying, hey, do you realize this is what we're doing?
That's got to be pretty hard, though, because you probably feel like you're attacked.
Oh, yeah, it's
like,
frustrating.
on your back.
It's frustrating because you hear an elected official say, hey, I'm getting together with all these other elected officials, and we're fixing to put it to y'all. Like, verbatim, I've heard a guy say that. And I said, do you realize what you just said? Like, are you listening to what you're saying? You have to guard against getting angry and come at it from a standpoint of, okay, let's take a deep breath. Let's talk about really what you're saying. And most of the time, with a little bit of effort, you can get people to see, hey, I'm not the enemy. I have to do business in your parish, but I'm already helping you do what you want me to help you do more with.
Yeah.
And isn't that enough already? So most of the time that those stories have ended on a positive note.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, then the next thing is you talked about truck insurance. That's, all of our log enforcement, they have to have trucks to get that tree from the stump to the end user, the mill. And there's a whole lot of different factors, but over the last 18 months, what normally would have cost, say, $5,000 to insure that truck for a year, now may be as much as $20,000 or $30,000. And part of that is the way that our drivers or truck owners were using those trucks. They weren't, maintaining the records and different stuff. So when that truck was in a wreck, the insurance company had $1 million that would be earmarked to settle a claim based off a wreck with a log truck. Well, the other guy's lawyer knew that $1 million was sitting there, and they could muddy up the water asking for the driver's drug test. How often does he get drug tested? Let me see the truck's maintenance records. Has the guy done this, and this safety training? Did he do an inspection that day? Blah, 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 blah. Muddy up enough water to get the truck driver's insurance company to settle out of court because they didn't have a leg to stand on. So they got out-lawyered. Then that $1 million that was sitting there that earmarked now goes to this person. And there was a group of people over in Monroe that were literally running into log trucks, claiming the log truck hit them to get it to go to court so they could get free money. Well, you can only do that. There's no such thing as free money. That money's coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
So if I'm paying, let's say I'm paying $5,000 for one truck to insurance company X. Well, if I have a log truck wreck and I have a $300,000 claim, but I've only paid $5,000, it doesn't take very long for that insurance company to run out of money. They go out of business. So everybody's insurance rate gone up. And then you have, and I'm probably going to get unpolitically correct, but you have ambulance chasing lawyers all over the state. I mean, there's literally, when you come into Shreveport, there's a big billboard that says, and there's a lawyer on there, there's an 18-wheeler, and it says, I'll make them pay. I know of a very big truck company that was literally considering moving their headquarters to Louisiana, and they were coming over here for a meeting and saw that sign,
said nope,
and said, I ain't no way.
Yeah. And that's just that's not just Shreveport.
And we have some very highly elected officials that are trial lawyers by trade. And I have friends that are attorneys, and they're lobbying groups and political action committees of lawyers that are doing everything they can to keep things the way they are, and it costs money. So you have a guy that was paying $5,000 or $6,000 a year to run his log truck. Now he's paying $30,000. Well, that money's got to come from somewhere.
So where does it come from?
Well, he's got to drive a lot more. He's got to deliver a lot more tons with that truck. It makes our logging rate goes up. Well, I say, hey, our rates are going up. I have a budget I have to operate within. So now I can pay less to the landowner for his trees because I got more cost to cover. So it really goes back to the guy growing the crop that's getting less.
It goes back to the small guy.
It goes back to the small guy.
One of the things I've heard is, I mean, am I right? And there's only like one or two companies that even write insurance for those timber logging trucks?
So
I mean, there's companies getting out of the business.
Yeah, well, they can't. They just decided that, hey, writing log truck insurance in Louisiana is not a benefit to it, so we're just not going to do it.
Yeah.
And I don't know the exact number, but I can tell you there's very few of them.
Yeah.
And the ones that are doing it are charging exorbitant amounts of money because they have to
cover themselves.
Because the insurance is a group of people putting their money together based off of statistics saying, okay, there's 1,000 people putting money into this pool, and we've figured out that 2 of us are going to need to pull money out of this pool X number of times a year.
Yeah.
And so there's always this big pool of money. Well, if you flip that, there's not that many people doing it, and then every time one of those people has a problem, it pulls a lot of money out of that pool. It doesn't take long for the pool to dry up.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's just a mess. I mean, what's the solution for truckers for the industry?
So I can tell you what we did is once we knew this was coming, we hosted an insurance forum with a local guy that deals in commercial insurance, so log trucks, construction, that kind of stuff. And he basically said, okay, it's coming, it's going to happen, this is why it's happening, and this is what you can do to reduce your exposure. You know, you've got to make your driving force more professional. You've got to maintain your records like a professional over-the-road trucking company does. It's like a DOT. If a truck has a DOT number on it, they have a lot stricter standards. They have to maintain records. They have to do all these different things. And he said, look, if you're gonna continue doing this and you don't want your rates to go up every year, you're gonna have to do something to slow that rise and reduce your exposure. So we just basically educated our loggers and said, hey, you're gonna have to start doing this. And there's little things you can do, like these guys they were driving log trucks home, so they were commuting in that truck. Well, the more miles that truck is on the road, chances are
it's just more exposure.
It's more exposure.
Yeah.
So little things like, hey, have the truck go to a yard and let the guy drive his own car home. Making sure that when that truck goes out on the road, it's dispatched, it's got a good maintenance inspection done that day, it's got good maintenance records, the driver's healthy. All those kind of things.
Really covering your back.
So that they can go back to the insurance company and say, hey, we're doing all this stuff. So if this truck is in a wreck and you have to fight the wreck in court, here's all the records for that truck.
Gotcha.
So now you're giving their attorney
some ammo.
The tools or the ammo that he needs to fight the opposing attorney to keep the money from changing hands.
Gotcha.
If that truck was not at fault. Little things like putting cameras on trucks, putting GPS trackers on trucks, putting weight scales on trucks, those kinds of things. That's all the kind of little things that we were encouraging the logging force to do to keep their insurance rates from going up anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's what kind of we've had to do.
So I guess is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Is there any silver lining in all of this? I mean, I guess.
So now I've got and this is only Trey Gingles' opinion. Until people in this state start really caring about who they vote for at the parish level and at the state level, things are not going to change. They're not. If you keep sending the same guy up there by a different name that does the same thing the guy before him did, things are not going to change. They're not. And I've one of the things about living all over the country that I've learned is Louisiana is very unique in a lot of ways, but we have a lot of things that we can learn from other states. People in other states vote a certain way, and that yields a certain outcome, and it influences their quality of life. We haven't always done that here. And so if you gripe about the road you drive on, what I'm saying is, in the big scheme of things, that's your fault.
Yeah.
It's our fault because we've become accustomed to that being just the way it is, and I'm saying it doesn't have to be that way.
You sound like you have an idea. Are you running for Congress, running for state, running for parish level?
And here's what. But that's a good question, because one of the and I'm just kind of figuring this out. I'm slow, but like we're voting Saturday. This is the first election I've really cared about who's on the police jury. And it's because because they're the ones they have to see at the. You heard people say all politics is local. The guy that I'm voting for, I'm going to run into at the grocery store. Well, if he's been an idiot, he doesn't want to go to the grocery store because he's got to live with me. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to run into the governor at the grocery store, chances are. But I can run into the guy that does something that I think is dumb or does something that's good. I'm going to run into that guy.
So there's a chance for more accountability.
I need to know who he is. Yeah, he's accountable. He got to live here. Mm-hmm. So, and it doesn't have to be, just people just need to pay attention instead of just casting a vote. That's like, I'm a veteran. I get, thank you for your service all the time. I want people, hey, if you really appreciate what I did, just vote. I don't care how you vote, just vote. Make an informed vote. Mm-hmm. But going back to what I was talking about, this is the first time that I've ever really cared about who is on the police jury. And it's because I really kind of have started to understand why that's important. Yeah. So people just need to pay more attention. Yeah. But I think that, like you were talking about me running for office, I know what the U.S. Constitution is. I've got 2 copies in my house. When I'm watching the news, I'll use it and be like, hey, they can't do that because that's wrong. Mm-hmm. I've never read our state's constitution. Now, one thing I have noticed is that Louisiana we make every law a freaking amendment, mm-hmm. which is silly. And I know why they're doing it. They're doing it because it takes an even higher majority to get it changed once it's an amendment. But think about how many times you voted and there were 10 amendments that you had to vote on at the end.
There's 4 this
That's
election.
Silly. Why? And again, this is just my uneducated opinion, but I'd like to get a copy. I mean, where do you get a copy of our state's constitution?
It's got to be somewhere, I would assume.
Yeah, but see,
I've never looked at it either.
When I say it's our fault, I should know what that is. How many amendments are there? There's got to be. I bet our Constitution is that thick, and it shouldn't be. We ought to all have a copy of it. We ought to know what our rights are, mm-hmm. so we can hold people accountable. And if it's that thick, we probably need to burn it and start over. And I don't know that that's ever going to happen, but you may need to just start over, mm-hmm. Because now we've gummed it up so much that you really can't figure out where the problem is.
You can't make any kind of a law without coming in conflict with 3 or 4 others.
And it takes, that they've created. This is why, and this is a soapbox thing, but I hate. People say, man, I hate attorneys. Well, I don't know about hate. That's probably not the. But most people dislike attorneys because you have to have an attorney to fight the other guy's attorney. And then attorneys grow up to be politicians that make laws to solve problems created by attorneys that only an attorney can fix. So it's like they have this industry that they create their own demand with. Mm-hmm. And that's why most people they dislike. And I've got friends that are attorneys. But why do we allow politicians to create problems and then offer only solutions that maintain their power and never really fix the problem? I mean, think about that's what happens.
It's interesting. It's an interesting perspective.
But we ought to, as citizens, we ought to know where's our, I don't even know how to find a copy of our Constitution. That's a sad indictment of myself.
Yeah, you're making me realize that. I'm right there with you.
I have the U.S. Constitution because it's in a little. I bought one in Virginia, and then I bought a rifle from somewhere, and they sent a copy of the Constitution with the gun. So I've got several copies of that. But where's our state's Constitution? what is the governing document for Lincoln Parish, the parish we're sitting in? Does the parish have a charter? Does it have what is the constitution-like document at the parish level?
Yeah.
What is the source document that a parish police juryman should reference when he's voting on something in his parish?
Yeah.
Where do you get that? See,
these are big questions. That's interesting.
So when you're driving down the road, and I'm not saying you, I'm saying when we are driving down the road, griping about the road being bumpy, where do you start?
Yeah.
Start reading, Yeah. And we're all guilty of it because we've accepted Louisiana being 5th on every bad list that comes out. We just say, oh, that's the way it's.
Yeah,
that's
we
the way
suck
it is.
sometimes.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
Our state is wholly unique in our culture and the natural resources that we have, but we're also unique in that we suck because we continue to suck. You don't have to suck all your life. We can change things. That's one thing about this state. If I could change it, I'd change it. And it starts with, I'm going to try to figure out in the next month how to get me a copy of the Constitution. I'm going to
research that this evening.
I want to know what document governs a parish government.
It's interesting.
Well,
Trey, we've talked Marines, we've talked timber, we've now talked politics and local politics.
Right.
One of the things I like about this podcast and I want to do is talk about things not related to ag, but I feel like there's a lot of common things. Right. What do you do when you're not, granted, you have a really cool job where you get to go out and cruise timber and drive around in your fine Jeep. You're also, Marine, so you have that job still. But what do you do when you're not? What does Trey Gingles do for fun?
So I like to work out a lot. I like to shoot a lot. I like to travel. Like if I won, who was I talking about this the other day? I was talking to somebody. I was like, if I won the lottery, I don't think I would quit my job because I really like the people I work with. I would probably be hard to find on Tuesdays or Thursdays and Fridays, and I would want a lot of vacation, but I would travel a lot. But I mean, I'm a pretty simple creature. I like shooting. I like to work out. I like hunting. Oddly, I would rather if we're going to do it, hunt in Louisiana. I'd rather duck hunt and fish in Louisiana and then go deer hunting somewhere else just because I'm in the woods all the time and I just like to look at something different. But that's pretty much it. I mean, that's
hunting, fishing, good old country boy from Louisiana.
Right. And sadly, nobody gets to do it as much as they want to. But.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I was raised doing it, but I don't. Yeah. For me to do it, I either have to get a lease around Baton Rouge, where it's accessible, or I have to go home and spend a weekend, 2.5 hours.
And see, we're lucky. Lincoln Parish has a really good. We have the Ruston Gun Club. They have a really good range, which is like 10 minutes from here, so I can shoot almost every day if I want to. But hunting, I've got a friend of mine has a ranch out in Texas that we go out once or twice a year and deer hunt out there, and it's just different. It's open sagebrush, open rolling terrain. It's pretty, just because it's different. And then I have a couple of friends that have fishing charter businesses out of South Louisiana, so we can go fishing down there. And then we haven't had a hard time finding a place to duck hunt. So and that's one of the cool things about living here. Like, it's on our license plates, but I think people take it for granted. It's truly a sportsman's paradise.
Yeah,
you can do everything here.
Yeah, you mentioned this also going back to ag a little bit, but we are so diverse agriculturally. With our delta soil, we can grow whatever we want to.
Absolutely.
And we also have the sportsman's paradise. We have a lot, and the culture of the state.
Oh yeah,
you know that. I mean, you can travel all over the world and probably not find as quite a eclectic group as you can in Louisiana. So it kind of makes it, going back to that point about politics and being on those terrible lists.
Right.
It's a shame. It's kind of embarrassing when you think about it. We have all this great stuff going for us.
But literally there's no, and I'm not trying to sound arrogant or different, but I've just been lucky in that I've gotten to see a lot of different places in the world, and there is no place like Louisiana. There's nowhere else like this place. I've been all over the world, and people talk about New Orleans like it's some, fantasy place, and it really is. Now, I grew up in Kenner, So I'm from Shreveport, but we lived in Kenner when I was young. And so you kind of, having lived down there, you kind of took, or I began to take New Orleans and what it is for granted. And only after Katrina and going back, after having lived in North Carolina and different places in the States, and going back to New Orleans after Katrina, and it kind of took that for me personally to kind of re-fall in love with New Orleans. Mm-hmm. Now, I can go down there. New Orleans is about a 3 or 4 night deal for me, and then I just got to get back to the woods, because New Orleans is not my home. It's Louisiana, but New Orleans is unique in the world. You know, it's up there with Rome as far as people recognizing it for what its uniqueness. But then you look at the state, you have, the I-10 corridor is the marsh, and then you have the Delta, which is east of here, and then you have the Piney Woods, which is in the northwest corner or the north and central and west part of the state. That's 3 different, very distinct areas that a lot of states don't have that. And then you have the river. You got 2 big rivers, and that's something we talked about in the ag leadership class when we went to New Orleans about, you got the largest inland port in the world. You got, I don't know how many railroads coming in and out of this state, but it's a bunch, and they all converge here to go to New Orleans or Baton Rouge. And you got the Red River and the Mississippi River. So, and the Ouachita River. So you got all those things come together, and you've got the influence of the Caribbean, the slaves, the music, people from that were coming through here going west that ended up staying. There's just so many different people or groups of people that decided to stay here that you just don't get that. It's a melting pot within the melting pot.
Yeah. Yeah, and as we're talking, we're also not mentioning the fact that we have the oil and gas.
Oh yeah.
The seafood. Oh yeah. That is unmatched across the country.
Yeah, you can't
across the world probably. Mm-hmm. So again, going back to that, there's no reason that we shouldn't be at the top of every list.
Exactly.
Places to live.
Exactly.
I mean, there's no other place I'd want to live.
Right.
No other places I'd want to go and travel and tell stories of people in agriculture, because it's so diverse, and I can tell a forester story one day and a shrimper's the next.
Exactly.
So I guess to wrap this up, a final plea, echoing what you said, and get involved politically. You mentioned it yesterday to our class. You reminded us what the lobbyist for Louisiana Farm Bureau says, Joe Mapes.
Yeah, you're either at the table or on the menu. And having heard that when I was in the class, I was like, you know what, the guy's right. And what's crazy, and this goes back to elected officials, if a representative gets 10 calls on something, that becomes a big deal. Well, if nobody calls so literally 10 people could get together, say, hey, we're going to all call this guy this week, and we're going to raise heck about a certain facet of an issue that only those 10 people care about, but that's the only 10 people he hears from. He thinks that's what everybody that he's voting to cover wants. He votes that way. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the 10,000 other people in his district are working and don't want that, don't call, aren't informed, and they get the short end of the stick because they didn't say anything. Mm-hmm. And that's and you learned this when you went to your DC trip, like everybody I met with on that trip, they'd say, what can we do for you? I said, the first thing you do is don't do anything. Like, I don't want anything. I want you to stay away. Like, leave me alone. And that was flabbergasting to them, because they're in the industry of government and they are the solution to every problem, which is BS. But I would tell them, like, I don't want you to do anything. I don't want you to do anything. Just leave me alone. They're like, what are you talking about? In fact, if you really want to do something, take some stuff off the books. Be less restrictive. But also learning that this country's run by a bunch of idealistic 25 to 30-year-old kids who they wrote a good paper, they were from a good family, they got to be a staffer, and now they're this guy or lady's elected officials expert on agriculture, and they just wrote a paper in college, but they've never been on a farm. Mm-hmm. That's the people that are governing this country, and they're governing through influence because now they're the expert for an elected official that never hears from a citizen. They were introducing us, hey, this is Trey, he's a real person. I heard people say, that happen to me 3 different times.
You're a real person that represents every other person in your industry.
Yeah.
I mean, you're representing.
But that's in the bubble of DC, it's literally, and you don't realize it until you go there and figure out these people are they're in the industry of governance, and a bunch of them don't know what they're doing. They want to listen, but nobody's talking to them.
They want to be informed. That's one of the things that's impressive to me. I mean,
they want to know.
They're dependent on us,
right?
And us making that call and being involved. So it's cool. It's a good reminder because it's easy to forget.
And it doesn't take very much.
Yeah.
I mean, like, how many things do you pick up the phone or send an email or write somebody on that they're going to vote, and the way they vote is going to literally influence your life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we just sit here and take it. Yeah. And I just don't get it.
Going back to it's easy to talk about it and say, okay, how in the world are we going to email a U.S. congressman and it make a difference? But
Google it.
Back to the parish level, even the state level, that really will affect your life. If all of a sudden you're getting one of your roads is not a gravel road and it's becoming an asphalt road, that affects your life.
Right. Yeah.
And it may mean you can't drive home that day. It's going to affect your life in a
some
positive way, negative
in some way. Yeah, absolutely.
And you can be a part of that.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is pretty valuable to remember. I mean, it's huge.
And we've forgotten that the people in government work for us. That there's no other place on the planet that it's like that.
And I guess to give them a little bit of backup, most of the people I've ever spoken with, in Louisiana delegations, they remember that, at least whenever we speak with them.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So we are fortunate in that, but it is just a reality. So I don't want to overgeneralize and stuff. But
no, you're right.
They are humans, but it's neat to it's neat to think about the fact that some of them do recognize that they do work for us. They are our
absolutely.
So it's a good relationship, and it's a good relationship to be a part of.
Absolutely.
Because Joe Mapes, if you're not on the menu, you're on the table.
Right.
Not at the table, you're on the menu.
Exactly.
Sorry, Joe, I messed that up.
And it's true. It's a great analogy for the way things go.
Yeah. So best way to be on the menu at the table. I am screwing that all up.
That's all right.
Best way to be at the table is by having your voice heard, and that's by voting, by just sharing your knowledge, sharing your expertise.
Find out when that guy's going to be in his office, or your elected official is going to be in the office, and just drop in and say, hey, I'm one of your constituents. I've heard this is coming up. What do you think about it? Or why do you think the way that you think?
Yeah, give me what's going on in your head.
Right. And they're gonna, if they should have the time, and they should be able to talk about it. And I think if you hit them in a positive, professional way at a good time, or maybe go back and talk to them. But my point is, if you get the chance, make the effort to talk to them and figure out why. Because sometimes they voted a certain way because they've heard, or they think that's what most people want. So
because those few people that made the call.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Trey, thank you for your service.
Yep.
As a Marine, thank you for 20 years around. Is that about what you've been serving?
About right, yeah.
Most of your adult life. Thank you for that. Thank you for what you do in the timber industry. Thanks for sharing your time today.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for coming by here. You kind of went out of your way. So.
A little bit. It's been fun.
It has been. I've enjoyed it.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.